They laughed when a homeless Navy SEAL inherited a collapsing ranch, until his dog uncovered a hidden door worth $7 million. They called him a failure. A homeless Navy SEAL sleeping in an old pickup, with only his retired military German Shepherd by his side. Then a forgotten inheritance led him deep into the Montana mountains, where a ruined ranch hid a secret no one else could find. But while greedy relatives mocked him, his loyal dog stopped at one old wall, and what waited behind it would change everything. Comment 1 if you believe loyalty and honor still matter, or 0 if you think people only care about money, and tell us where you're watching from. The wind always reached Ethan Mercer before sunrise. It slipped down from the Bitterroot Mountains carrying the scent of pine, cold stone, and melting snow, then rattled the faded shell of the old blue pickup parked behind a weathered truck stop outside Hamilton, Montana. The truck had once belonged to a rancher, judging by the cracked leather bench seat and rusted toolbox bolted behind the cab. Now it was home. 43-year-old Ethan Mercer opened his eyes before the first light touched the horizon. Not because he had slept well, because he almost never did. A familiar pressure tightened across his chest. His breathing turned shallow. His fingers curled instinctively, searching for equipment that had not been there in years. The dream had returned. It always returned. Dark water, gunfire echoing through broken concrete, a voice calling his name, then silence. His heartbeat accelerated until another warm weight rested gently against his arm. A wet nose nudged his hand. Ethan. No words had been spoken. They never needed to be. The German Shepherd standing beside him had already learned every battle that still lived inside his former handler's mind. Rex pressed closer, placing one heavy paw across Ethan's forearm exactly the way military trainers had taught him years ago. Ground the handler. Interrupt the panic. Stay until breathing slows. Ethan blinked several times before looking into the dog's amber eyes. "I'm here," he whispered hoarsely. Rex didn't move. Only when Ethan finally took one slow breath, then another, did the dog step back and sit quietly inside the cramped truck. Morning light slowly crept over the mountain ridges. The truck stop began waking. Diesel engines rumbled to life. Coffee machines hissed. A waitress unlocked the front door. Long-haul drivers climbed into their rigs with the exhausted routine of people who measured life by highway miles instead of calendars. Ethan stretched carefully, his left shoulder stiff from an old parachute injury. His right knee protested as he climbed out of the truck. And for a moment, he simply stood there, looking east as sunlight painted the snow-covered peaks with gold. Beautiful. Painfully beautiful. Montana had a way of making a man feel both impossibly small and strangely alive. He reached into the truck bed and poured fresh water into Rex's bowl before filling his own battered metal cup from a plastic container. Breakfast consisted of instant oatmeal heated inside the truck stop microwave. The cashier didn't even ask anymore. She simply nodded. "Morning, Ethan." "Morning, Linda." She handed him a small paper bag. "I made an extra biscuit." "You don't have to keep doing that." "I know." She smiled gently. "But I keep making extra biscuits." Ethan hesitated before accepting it. "Thank you." Linda looked toward Rex, now lying patiently outside the glass entrance. "He's looking thinner." "So am I." She laughed softly. "You still taking care of each other?" "Every day." She nodded once. "That's what matters." Ethan carried the biscuit outside, breaking it neatly in half. One half for himself, one half for Rex. The dog accepted it gently without grabbing, exactly as military working dogs are trained. Even after retirement, discipline never completely disappeared. They ate together in silence. A pair of teenagers walked past. One slowed. "Dad, look!" His father barely glanced over. Probably another homeless guy. The words weren't spoken cruelly. just casually, as though Ethan had become part of the scenery, like abandoned shopping carts or cracked pavement, invisible. He pretended not to hear. Years ago, those words would have burned. Now they simply settled somewhere inside him beside everything else. After breakfast, he folded his sleeping bag with military precision. Every item returned to exactly the same place. Blanket, flashlight, medical kit, dog supplies, old duffel bag. The habits of a Navy SEAL survived long after uniforms disappeared. Chaos outside, order inside. It was the only way he knew how to keep moving. By mid-morning, he headed toward the nearby river trail. Rex trotted several steps ahead before slowing enough to match Ethan's pace. They walked this trail almost every day. Some locals waved, others avoided eye contact. Children almost always asked to pet the dog. Adults usually asked nothing. Halfway down the trail, Ethan stopped beside a weathered wooden bench overlooking the Bitterroot River. The water rushed cold and clear between smooth gray stones. He sat. Rex immediately positioned himself where he could watch both the trail behind them and the open meadow ahead. Always watching, always protecting. Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and unfolded a photograph that had begun separating along the edges. 3 men stood shoulder to shoulder wearing desert camouflage, all smiling, all younger. Lieutenant Aaron Pike, Chief Daniel Ross, and Ethan. Only one of them remained alive. His thumb rested briefly over their faces. I should have brought both of you home. The river answered only with moving water. People often thanked veterans for their service. Few ever asked about the names they carried afterward. Ethan folded the photograph again before Rex gently rested his head against Ethan's knee. You remember them too, don't you? The dog looked up quietly. Rex had served beside all 3 men. Dogs remembered. Not with words, with scent, with routine, with absence. A pickup rolled into the gravel parking lot nearby. An older rancher stepped out carrying 2 sacks of livestock feed. He recognized Ethan immediately. You looking for work today? Always. Fence repair. How long? Probably 6 hours. Ethan nodded. I'll do it. By noon, he was replacing broken fence posts beneath an endless Montana sky. The ranch paid cash. Not much, but enough to buy dog food. Enough to refill the truck with gasoline. Enough to survive another week. The rancher's wife brought lemonade around mid-afternoon. She handed Ethan the glass. You served? He smiled faintly. Yes, ma'am. My brother was Marine Corps. I'm sorry. She looked surprised. He's alive. I'm glad. She studied Ethan for a moment. You said that like someone who isn't. Ethan simply returned to hammering another fence post. Some conversations hurt too much to finish. When the work ended, the rancher counted 3 $100 bills into Ethan's hand. Good work. Thank you. He hesitated. You ever need steady help? The rancher looked embarrassed. My insurance company won't cover hiring someone living out of a vehicle. I understand. Neither man blamed the other. Sometimes life closed doors without asking anyone's permission. Late afternoon shadows stretched across the highway as Ethan returned to the truck stop. He purchased a large bag of dog food before buying canned soup for himself. The cashier handed him his receipt. You got a phone call earlier. My phone's been dead. They said it sounded important. Ethan frowned. Did they leave a name? She glanced toward a sticky note beside the register. Rebecca Lawson. He didn't recognize it. There was also a number. He borrowed the truck stop phone. The line rang twice. A calm female voice answered. Lawson and Pierce Law Offices. Rebecca Lawson speaking. This is Ethan Mercer. A brief pause followed. Mr. Mercer. Her tone immediately softened. I've been trying to reach you. I was told you called. Yes. I'm afraid I'm calling regarding the estate of Samuel Mercer. Ethan searched his memory. Samuel, his father's uncle, a quiet man he'd met only twice as a child. I didn't know he was still alive. I'm sorry to tell you he passed away last week. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. I'm sorry to hear that. He named you specifically in his last will and testament. Silence. I think you may have the wrong Ethan. I assure you I do not. Another pause. Mr. Mercer, your great-uncle left you his property. My what? A ranch located in the Sapphire Mountains. Ethan almost laughed. There has to be some mistake. There isn't. I haven't spoken to him in over 20 years. He anticipated that reaction. Rebecca's voice became almost thoughtful. He left written instructions requesting that I personally make sure you attend the reading. Ethan leaned against the payphone. I don't have money for lawyers. You won't need any. I don't even own a house. I know. Her answer caught him off guard. He knew too. The wind outside pushed dust across the parking lot. Rex looked toward the truck stop entrance as though sensing something had changed. Rebecca continued. The reading is in Missoula 2 days from now. Why me? I'm afraid I can't answer that until the will is formally read. Ethan looked across the highway toward the distant mountains glowing beneath the evening sun. What exactly did he leave? I'm only permitted to say this. She paused. A mountain ranch. Nothing more. No explanation. No reason. Just a ranch belonging to a man who had barely known him. When the call ended, Ethan remained standing beside the payphone for several long moments. Rex walked over quietly. The dog sat beside him without making a sound. Ethan scratched behind the shepherd's ears. You hear that, partner? Rex tilted his head. We might actually have somewhere to go. The dog stood immediately, tail still, eyes alert, as though he had been waiting much longer than Ethan realized. Far beyond the truck stop, the last sunlight disappeared behind the Montana mountains. Neither Ethan nor Rex noticed that somewhere beyond those dark ridges, a forgotten ranch had already begun waiting for them. And so had people who desperately hoped Ethan would never reach it. The next morning arrived wrapped in pale gray clouds drifting low across the Bitterroot Valley. Frost covered the truck's windshield in delicate white patterns, and Ethan rubbed the glass with the sleeve of his old field jacket until he could see the mountains again. He hadn't slept much. The phone call replayed over and over inside his mind. A ranch, an inheritance, his name in a will. None of it fit the life he had been living. He poured fresh water into Rex's bowl before kneeling beside the dog. What do you think? Rex watched him quietly, ears forward. You've followed me into worse places. The German shepherd rose immediately. Ethan smiled for the first time in weeks. I figured you'd say that. By sunrise, they were driving north toward Missoula. The old pickup groaned on every hill, its engine protesting every mile. Snow still clung to the higher peaks, while valleys below were beginning to show the first signs of spring. Long fences stretched across open ranchland where cattle grazed beneath endless skies. The drive gave Ethan too much time to think. He remembered meeting Samuel Mercer only twice. Once when Ethan was 9 years old, chasing dragonflies outside a family reunion. The second time had been shortly before Ethan enlisted. Samuel had shaken his hand firmly and simply said, "Serve with honor. Come home if you can." That had been nearly 25 years earlier. Why would that man leave him anything? The law office occupied the second floor of an old brick building overlooking downtown Missoula. It was elegant without being flashy. Polished hardwood floors reflected afternoon sunlight. Oil paintings lined the hallway. Fresh flowers sat behind the reception desk. Ethan suddenly became painfully aware of the worn elbows on his jacket. His boots carried dried mud from yesterday's ranch work. His hands still bore fresh scrapes from repairing fence posts. A young receptionist offered a polite smile. Mr. Mercer? He nodded. They're waiting for you. As Ethan followed her down the hallway, Rex stayed perfectly at his left side, moving with the quiet discipline that years of military service had engraved into him. The conference room fell silent the moment they entered. 4 people were already seated around a polished walnut table. Attorney Rebecca Lawson stood first. She appeared to be in her early 50s, with silver beginning to thread through dark hair neatly gathered behind her head. Her handshake was warm but professional. Mr. Mercer. Miss Lawson. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. Rebecca glanced toward the others. Please have a seat. Ethan chose the chair nearest the door. Rex settled beside him without command. Across the table sat a sharply dressed woman wearing a cream-colored designer suit and a diamond necklace that caught every beam of light entering through the windows. Her expression carried the practiced confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Caroline Grayson, Rebecca said. Caroline barely nodded. Beside her sat a broad-shouldered man with expensive cufflinks and a perfectly tailored navy suit. Douglas Grayson. He didn't bother hiding his curiosity as he looked Ethan up and down. Finally came Blake, probably 30 years old, perfect haircut, luxury watch. His attention rarely left the glowing screen of his phone. No one offered Ethan a handshake. Rebecca opened a leather folder. Thank you all for coming. Her calm voice filled the room. We are gathered today for the reading of the last will and testament of Samuel Henry Mercer. The room became very still. Rebecca began reading. Samuel left several charitable donations to local churches and veterans organizations. A modest scholarship fund received another portion. Then came the family. To my niece, Caroline Grayson, Rebecca paused. I leave my investment portfolio, retirement accounts, and all associated financial holdings. Caroline's lips curved into a satisfied smile. Douglas leaned comfortably into his chair. Blake looked up from his phone for the first time. Rebecca continued. To my great-nephew, Blake Grayson. She turned another page. My restored vehicle collection, including the 1967 Mustang Fastback, the 1955 Chevrolet pickup, and all accompanying maintenance equipment. Blake grinned openly. Nice. Douglas chuckled. I knew the old man appreciated quality. Rebecca didn't respond. Instead, she reached the final page. Her expression changed almost imperceptibly. And finally, Ethan felt Rex shift slightly beside his chair. To my great-nephew, Ethan Mercer. Silence settled across the room. I leave all rights, title, and ownership of my property located at Mercer Ridge Ranch, including 160 acres of land, the primary residence, all outbuildings, all fixtures, and all contents remaining upon the property. Rebecca closed the folder, along with one brass key specifically identified within the estate inventory. No one spoke. Then Blake laughed, not loudly, just enough to break the silence. Wait. He looked toward Ethan. You got the old ranch? Douglas leaned back in his chair. Oh, that's incredible. Caroline slowly removed her glasses. I suppose Samuel always did have an unusual sense of humor. Ethan frowned. I don't understand. Caroline folded her hands neatly. You will? Douglas smiled, though there wasn't much kindness in it. That ranch has been falling apart for decades. Roofs collapsing, Blake added. No electricity. Douglas continued counting on his fingers. No plumbing. Half the barn burned down, Blake said. Road washes out every spring. Douglas laughed. You inherited a money pit. Caroline tilted her head sympathetically. Honestly, Ethan, she paused just long enough to sound sincere. I'm worried about you. He said nothing. She continued. I've heard you've had difficult years. The room suddenly felt much smaller. You've served your country. I'm sure you've done your best. But maintaining that property? She sighed gently. It would ruin anyone financially. Douglas leaned forward. I own a development company. He smiled. I'd be willing to help. Ethan finally spoke. Help? We'll buy it. So you don't have to deal with demolition costs. Blake nodded enthusiastically. Seriously? You'd be doing yourself a favor. Caroline reached into her leather briefcase. To Ethan's surprise, she produced a prepared folder. Already waiting, already organized. She slid it halfway across the table. We had our attorney prepare a simple purchase agreement. Rebecca immediately looked up. Mrs. Grayson, Caroline continued as though she hadn't heard. We're offering $25,000. Douglas added quickly, cash. You could finally get back on your feet. Blake smiled. Maybe even get yourself an apartment. The words hung in the room, not openly cruel, almost worse. They were spoken with polished politeness, the kind that leaves no room to object. Ethan stared at the paperwork. $25,000 for 160 mountain acres. Something didn't fit. His instincts stirred, the same instincts that had kept him alive overseas. If the ranch was truly worthless, why were they trying to buy it before he had even seen it? He slowly raised his eyes. You came prepared. Douglas answered first. We assumed you'd want to get rid of it. Why? Douglas shrugged. Because it's useless. Rex suddenly stood, not aggressively, not barking, just rising quietly onto all fours. His gaze fixed directly on Douglas. The room changed. Douglas instinctively stopped talking. Rex never growled loudly, only a low vibration deep in his chest, almost too soft to hear, but impossible to ignore. Douglas glanced uneasily toward the dog. Control your animal. Ethan rested one hand gently against Rex's shoulder. He is under control. The growl stopped immediately. Rebecca watched the exchange carefully. Caroline forced another smile. I understand emotional attachments. But sentiment doesn't repair buildings. She pushed the purchase agreement another inch closer. Think practically. You've been through enough disappointment. No one would blame you. Ethan looked from Caroline to Douglas to Blake, then back to the unsigned papers. His answer came quietly. I'm keeping it. The smile disappeared from Caroline's face. I don't think you understand. I understand enough. Douglas folded his arms. You haven't even seen the place. No. But apparently you've been thinking about it for a long time. No one answered. Rebecca quietly reached into a velvet pouch resting beside the folder. She removed a tarnished brass key worn smooth from decades of use. Unlike the expensive watches and polished jewelry in the room, the key carried scratches. History. Weight. She placed it gently in Ethan's palm. Your uncle specifically instructed that this key remain with the deed. It felt unexpectedly heavy, almost warm. Ethan closed his fingers around it. For just a moment, he thought he saw something pass across Caroline's face. Not disappointment, not anger, fear. Only for an instant. Then it vanished. As the meeting concluded, Blake muttered under his breath while gathering his car keys. He's going to be begging us to buy that place in a month. Douglas smiled. I'll give him 2 weeks. Caroline stopped beside Ethan before leaving. Her voice dropped almost to a whisper. Some burdens look like gifts. She glanced briefly toward the brass key. You should think carefully before driving into those mountains. Then she walked away. Rex remained perfectly still until the conference room door closed behind the Grayson family. Only then did the German shepherd slowly turn toward Ethan. His ears remained forward, his eyes fixed not on the departing family, but on the brass key resting quietly in Ethan's hand. For several long seconds, neither Ethan nor Rex moved. The conference room had fallen silent after the Grayson family left, but the air still felt heavy, as though their laughter lingered between the polished wooden walls. Rebecca Lawson quietly gathered the remaining documents without speaking. She waited. Years of practicing estate law had taught her something simple. The most important conversations often began only after everyone else had gone. Ethan slowly slipped the brass key into his jacket pocket. "I don't understand any of this." Rebecca looked toward the closed conference room door before returning her attention to him. "I was hoping you would stay for a few minutes." "I wasn't planning on leaving yet." She nodded. "Good." She reached into a locked drawer beside the conference table and withdrew a weathered manila envelope. Unlike the legal papers stacked neatly around it, this envelope had clearly been handled many times. Its edges were soft. The paper had yellowed with age. Across the front, written in careful blue ink, were only 4 words. "For Ethan." At the ranch. Rebecca held it carefully instead of immediately handing it over. "Your uncle was very specific. He instructed me not to give you this until after the will was read." Ethan stared at the handwriting. "I recognize that." "You do?" "My father wrote like that." Rebecca smiled faintly. "They learned from the same school teacher." She finally extended the envelope. "But there was one more instruction." Ethan accepted it gently. "What was that?" "He said I was to tell you these exact words." She glanced briefly toward her notes before repeating them from memory. "If Ethan chooses money over questions, let him walk away. If he chooses questions over money, give him the letter." Ethan looked down at the purchase agreement Carolyn had left behind. $25,000. Enough to rent an apartment. Enough to replace his truck. Enough to buy peace. At least for a little while. Instead, he was holding an old envelope. Rebecca seemed to read his thoughts. "You could still sell." "I know. No one would blame you." "I know. But something isn't right." Rebecca leaned back slightly. "What makes you say that?" "They wanted that ranch before I even knew what I'd inherited." He paused. "They called it worthless. Yet they arrived with purchase papers already prepared." Rebecca's expression remained carefully neutral. "I noticed that too." "You did?" "I notice many things." She folded her hands. "I simply cannot speculate while acting as attorney for the estate." There was another long silence. Finally, Ethan asked the question that had been bothering him ever since the phone call. "What kind of man was Samuel?" Rebecca looked toward the window overlooking downtown Missoula. "The quiet kind. He came into this office every year. For 31 years. Always the same month. Always the same chair. He paid his taxes. Updated small details in the will. Then drove back into the mountains. He rarely spoke about himself. But whenever veterans came up in conversation," she smiled softly, "he always listened very carefully." Ethan frowned. "Did he ever mention me?" Rebecca hesitated. "Not often. But when he did..." "What?" "He always asked one question." She met Ethan's eyes. "Has anyone heard whether Ethan Mercer came home?" A lump formed in Ethan's throat. "He knew I came home." Rebecca slowly shook her head. "I don't think that's what he meant." The words settled heavily between them, because every veteran understood the difference. Returning from war and truly coming home were not always the same thing. Rebecca stood. "There is something else." She walked to a bookshelf and removed a folded county map. Opening it across the conference table, she pointed toward a remote section of western Montana. "The property sits here." The map showed little more than mountain ridges, winding forest roads, and a narrow creek running through deep valleys. "No nearby town?" "Elk Ridge, I've never heard of it. Most people haven't. Population? A little over 400. She traced a finger farther into the mountains. The last 12 miles aren't paved. What about utilities? Electricity reaches the front gate. But I can't promise much beyond that. Ethan almost laughed. So they weren't lying. No. The ranch really is isolated. Rebecca looked directly at him. But isolation and worthlessness are not the same thing. Those words stayed with him. Outside, afternoon sunlight reflected from passing cars. Life continued as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet Ethan felt as if he had stepped quietly into someone else's story. He thanked Rebecca before leaving the office. The elevator ride down felt strangely longer than when he had arrived. When the doors opened, Rex stepped out first. The dog paused on the sidewalk. Instead of immediately heading toward the truck, he looked west, toward the distant mountains. His ears lifted. "What is it?" Rex remained perfectly still. Traffic passed. People hurried along the sidewalks. Nothing seemed unusual. Finally, the shepherd relaxed and continued walking. Ethan couldn't explain why that brief moment unsettled him. Back at the truck stop outside Missoula, he parked beneath a row of cottonwood trees. Evening sunlight stretched long across the pavement. He climbed into the truck cab. The envelope rested quietly on the passenger seat. His fingers almost opened it. Almost. Instead, he remembered Rebecca's words. At the ranch. He placed it carefully inside his duffel bag without breaking the seal. If Samuel waited 30 years, he smiled faintly. Guess I can wait one more day. The drive toward the Sapphire Mountains began early the following morning. Civilization disappeared mile by mile. Gas stations became fewer. Cell service weakened. Highways narrowed into two-lane roads that wound between rivers and towering pine forests. Cloud shadows drifted across open valleys where abandoned barns leaned against decades of weather. Rex sat upright the entire drive, watching, always watching. By midday, Ethan stopped at a small diner beside an old grain elevator. The hand-painted sign simply read, Mabel's Cafe. Inside, only 6 customers occupied the booths. Everyone looked up when Ethan entered. Not because of him, because of Rex. The elderly waitress smiled warmly. Oh my. He's handsome. He behaves better than most people. Ethan laughed quietly. Usually. She brought coffee and a plate of eggs. When she returned with fresh refills, she noticed Ethan studying the folded county map. You heading up into the Sapphire Range? I think so. She looked closer. Then her smile faded. Mercer Ridge? You know it? I know where it is. Another customer glanced over from his booth. An older man wearing suspenders slowly lowered his newspaper. You buying that place? I inherited it. The diner became unusually quiet. The man exchanged a quick look with the waitress. Finally, he spoke. Didn't know Samuel had family. I suppose he did. He kept to himself. The waitress folded her arms. He wasn't unfriendly. Just private. The older man nodded. Smart man. Ethan sensed both of them choosing their words carefully. What's wrong with the ranch? The waitress answered first. Nothing. She hesitated. That the mountains didn't put there. The old man quietly added, and nothing people didn't make worse. Ethan looked between them. What does that mean? Neither answered immediately. Instead, the waitress refilled his coffee once more. If you meet old Walter Jensen in Elk Ridge, she smiled gently, he'll tell you more than we ever could. Before Ethan could ask another question, the conversation drifted elsewhere. It was over. Yet the mystery only deepened. By late afternoon, the paved highway ended. A weathered wooden sign pointed toward Elk Ridge. The asphalt gave way to gravel. Dust rose behind the truck. Towering pines closed around the narrow road until sunlight filtered through branches in scattered golden beams. The farther they drove, the quieter the world became. No traffic, no houses, only forest. Occasionally, Rex would lift his nose toward an open window, scenting the cold mountain air. Ethan recognized that behavior. The dog was cataloging everything: wildlife, water, strangers. Nothing escaped a trained military K9. The truck rounded another bend. Ahead, an aging wooden bridge crossed a fast-moving creek. Ethan slowed. The bridge looked sturdy enough, but weather had darkened every plank. Halfway across, he noticed faded initials carved into one support beam. S.M. Samuel Mercer. Someone had maintained this crossing. Not recently, but carefully. Beyond the bridge, the road climbed steadily into higher elevations. Snow still rested beneath the pines. Clouds gathered around distant peaks. The mountains seemed to swallow the world behind him. Ethan reached over and lightly touched the duffel bag resting beside the seat. Inside, the unopened envelope waited. Ahead, somewhere beyond the next ridge, waited the ranch, and whatever truth Samuel Mercer had spent decades protecting. Rex suddenly leaned forward, his ears locked on something invisible beyond the trees. The German shepherd gave one low, questioning whine, not frightened, not aggressive, curious. Ethan tightened both hands around the steering wheel. We're close. Neither of them realized that less than 2 miles away, hidden among towering pines and forgotten pasture land, someone had been watching the empty ranch road every afternoon for nearly a week, waiting to see whether Ethan Mercer would ever arrive. The figure stood far back among the pines, where the fading afternoon light never quite reached the forest floor. Through a pair of old binoculars, the blue pickup slowly climbed the final stretch of gravel road, its engine echoing softly through the valley. The watcher lowered the binoculars. So he came after all. No one answered. A moment later, the figure quietly disappeared into the trees. Ethan knew nothing about the unseen eyes. He was too busy navigating the deeply rutted road that twisted along the mountainside. Snowmelt had carved narrow trenches through the gravel, forcing the pickup to crawl forward one careful turn at a time. The forest slowly opened. The valley spread before him. There it was. Mercer Ridge Ranch. Even from a distance, the property carried the lonely dignity of something that had once mattered deeply. Rolling pasture stretched across the mountainside, bordered by weathered split-rail fencing that leaned at tired angles after years of harsh winters. Beyond the fields stood an old red barn, its western wall blackened by fire long ago. One side of the roof had collapsed inward, leaving broken rafters exposed against the sky. Farther uphill stood the farmhouse, built of thick gray stone and heavy timber, strong once, now exhausted. The front porch sagged noticeably to one side. Several windows had been boarded over. Sections of the roof had caved beneath decades of snow. Yet despite its condition, something about the place refused to look abandoned. Ethan shut off the truck. Silence settled over the valley. No traffic, no distant machinery, only wind moving through pine branches and the gentle rush of a creek somewhere below the hill. Rex jumped down first. Instead of running freely across the open pasture as many dogs would, he paused. Head high, nose working. His body remained perfectly still. Military training. Assess first, move second. Ethan quietly watched him. What do you smell? The shepherd slowly began walking, not toward the front door, not toward the barn. He circled the farmhouse once, nose close to the frozen ground, stopping occasionally beneath windows or beside old stone walls. Nothing about his behavior suggested excitement. It suggested investigation. Ethan retrieved his duffel bag, sleeping roll, flashlight, and the brass key before climbing the worn porch steps. Each board groaned beneath his weight. The front door looked as though it hadn't been painted since the early 1980s. Its brass lock was green with age. He removed the tarnished key from his pocket. For one strange moment, he hesitated. A feeling settled over him. Not fear. Respect. Someone had trusted him with this place. He inserted the key. The old lock resisted before finally turning with a heavy metallic click. The door opened inward. Cold air drifted out carrying the scent of dust, aged wood, damp stone, and something else. Cedar. Very faint, as though someone had once cared enough to preserve the house. Sunlight spilled through broken windows, revealing floating dust suspended in still air. The entry hall remained remarkably intact. An old coat rack stood beside the door. A faded military photograph hung crookedly above a small wooden table. Its frame was dusty, but not broken. Ethan stepped farther inside. Floorboards creaked beneath his boots. The living room opened to his left. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall. Nearby stood a rocking chair covered with a white sheet. Bookshelves lined another wall, most shelves now empty except for a handful of weathered volumes left behind. The furniture wore thick coats of dust, yet something immediately caught Ethan's attention. There were no signs of vandalism, no broken bottles, no graffiti, no evidence that teenagers had ever used the place as a hangout. It was as though everyone had simply stayed away. Rex entered quietly behind him. The dog's nose swept the room. He inspected each doorway, each corner, each window. Then, without warning, he ignored the entire living room. He continued down a narrow hallway toward the rear of the house. Easy. Ethan followed. The hallway walls displayed several black and white photographs. Most showed ranch life decades earlier. Cattle drives, snow-covered fences, families gathered during harvest. One photograph stopped Ethan cold. Samuel Mercer stood beside a younger man wearing military fatigues. The younger man looked strangely familiar. Ethan leaned closer. His breath caught. It was his father, much younger. Both men smiled broadly beside the very same farmhouse. He had never known his father had been here. A quiet ache settled inside him. How many stories had disappeared because no one had thought to tell them? Rex gave a short huff farther down the hallway. Ethan turned. The dog had stopped beside the kitchen. Unlike the rest of the house, the kitchen showed signs that someone had maintained it longer than expected. Old copper pots still hung neatly above the stove. The table remained upright. A cracked ceramic coffee mug rested beside the sink exactly where someone had left it years earlier. Dust covered everything, yet nothing felt random. Samuel had left the house, not abandoned it. Beyond the kitchen lay a narrow pantry. Shelves lined both walls. Most stood empty except for a few rusted mason jars. Rex entered, then stopped, completely. His ears rose. His tail became perfectly still. He stared toward the back wall. Ethan waited. The dog did not move. Instead, he stepped closer until his nose nearly touched the rough wooden boards. He inhaled slowly, once, twice, then looked upward, not at Ethan, at the wall itself. What is it? Rex remained silent. Ethan walked over and knocked lightly against the timber. Solid. Very solid. Old growth pine. Nothing unusual. He examined the floor. Nothing. No trapdoor. No loose boards. No visible seams. The wall appeared completely ordinary. After another minute, Rex reluctantly stepped away. But before leaving, he glanced back one final time, as though memorizing it. Outside, clouds drifted across the mountains, dimming the afternoon sun. Ethan decided to explore the rest of the property before dark. The burned barn stood nearly 200 yards from the house. Most of its roof had collapsed decades earlier. Charred beams still stretched toward the sky like blackened fingers. Yet beneath the ruin he found something unexpected. Fresh horseshoe prints. Not many. Only a few. No older than several days. Someone had been here recently. He crouched beside the tracks. No ranches appeared nearby on the map. Whoever visited this property had chosen to. The discovery unsettled him. Rex sniffed the ground nearby before quietly following another scent toward an equipment shed. The shed door hung crookedly from one hinge. Inside stood an old tractor buried beneath canvas tarps. Nearby rested neatly stacked bundles of firewood. Ethan frowned. The wood had been cut within the last year. Certainly not 30 years ago, someone had been maintaining at least parts of this ranch. But why? Evening arrived quickly in the mountains. Cold air settled across the valley. Ethan carried enough firewood back to the farmhouse to build a small blaze inside the stone fireplace. The chimney still worked. Warmth slowly filled the room. He heated canned soup over the flames while Rex lay nearby watching the front door. The familiar comfort of a campfire stirred old memories. Forward operating bases, mountain patrols, cold nights shared with teammates who trusted one another completely. For a little while, the silence felt peaceful, until darkness fully settled outside. The mountains changed after sunset. Every sound carried farther. Branches scraped gently against the roof. Wind sighed beneath the porch. Somewhere far away, a coyote called. Ethan unrolled his sleeping bag beside the fireplace. The fire burned low. Rex circled once before lying down. Not beside Ethan, not near the front door. Instead, the dog stood again. He walked calmly down the hallway, back to the pantry. Minutes passed. Ethan finally followed. He found Rex sitting exactly where he had stood earlier, facing the same wooden wall, completely motionless. Ethan. No. No one had spoken. Only memory. The sudden whisper inside his mind belonged to another lifetime. His heartbeat accelerated. Dark hallway, unknown building, breach team waiting. Move. Move now. His breathing became uneven. Sweat formed across his forehead despite the cold. The panic attack struck without warning. His vision narrowed. The hallway disappeared. Afghanistan returned. Gunfire. Smoke. Someone shouting his name. Then, a familiar pressure touched his wrist. Rex. The shepherd had already left the wall. He leaned firmly against Ethan's legs exactly as he had done countless times before, grounding him, pulling him back. Easy, Ethan whispered to himself. I'm here. The hallway slowly returned. The ranch, the fireplace, the cold mountain air. Not the battlefield. Not anymore. He knelt beside Rex, wrapping one arm around the dog's neck. Thanks, partner. Rex remained pressed against him until Ethan's breathing steadied. Only then. The shepherd quietly returned to the pantry wall. He sat, watching, listening, waiting. Ethan stared at the old boards once more. This time, he noticed something he had somehow missed before. Not a crack, not a handle. Just the faintest breath of cold air brushing across the back of his hand. It lasted only a second, then vanished. He slowly reached toward the wall. Nothing. The wood remained solid. Yet somewhere behind those weathered boards, something did not belong. And whatever it was, Rex had known it from the very first moment they entered the house. The old German shepherd never barked. He never pawed wildly at the wall or acted like an excited pet chasing a squirrel beneath the porch. Instead, he waited, perfectly still. His ears twitched every few seconds. His head tilted almost imperceptibly, as though he were listening to something so faint that human hearing could never reach it. Ethan remained beside him for another minute before slowly placing his own palm against the weathered boards. Cold, solid, ordinary. He knocked lightly, then harder. The sound remained dull and heavy. Nothing suggested there was empty space beyond. Finally, he exhaled. Maybe tomorrow. Rex looked back at him but refused to leave. You've earned one stubborn point. The dog blinked once. Ethan smiled tiredly. Come on. Only after Ethan walked back toward the fireplace did Rex reluctantly follow. The fire had burned down to glowing embers. Outside, snowflakes drifted quietly through the darkness. The mountains disappeared behind a curtain of white. The old farmhouse creaked softly as temperatures fell below freezing. Ethan wrapped himself inside his sleeping bag. Sleep did not come easily. It rarely did. Somewhere after midnight, the nightmare returned. The explosion always came first. A deafening flash, concrete collapsing, radio static. Then Daniel Ross shouting over the headset, "Ethan, move!" Smoke swallowed everything. Another blast. Aaron Pike disappeared beneath broken steel. Ethan tried reaching him. Couldn't. The dream changed. He was running. Always running. Always too late. Then came the familiar sound. A slow, rhythmic scratching. Not inside the dream. Inside the farmhouse. His eyes opened instantly. Years of military training overpowered exhaustion. Every muscle tensed. The room remained dark except for fading orange coals inside the fireplace. The scratching came again. Slow, measured, not frantic. Scratch, pause, scratch. Ethan quietly reached for the flashlight beside his sleeping bag. Rex was already awake. The shepherd stood motionless facing the hallway. Not growling, listening. The scratching stopped. Silence returned. Ethan clicked on the flashlight. The narrow beam swept slowly across the room before settling down the hallway. Nothing. He rose carefully. Old instincts returned. Heel first, weight controlled, minimal noise. Rex moved beside him without command. Together they reached the pantry. The wall stood exactly as before. No movement, no broken boards, no sign anyone had entered. Ethan frowned. Did you hear it too? Rex walked directly to the same place. He lowered his nose to the floor. Then, he scratched once, not randomly. One precise scrape across a single floorboard. He stepped back, looked at Ethan, then scratched the exact same spot again. Ethan knelt. His flashlight illuminated rough pine planks darkened by decades of use. At first he saw nothing unusual. Then, one board showed slightly less wear than the others, barely noticeable. Its nail heads appeared newer. Not new, just newer. He ran his fingers along the edge. There, a tiny gap, no wider than a coin. He reached for the old pocket knife clipped inside his jacket. Carefully sliding the blade beneath the edge, he applied gentle pressure. The board resisted, then suddenly lifted. Dust drifted upward. Hidden beneath lay a shallow compartment no larger than a shoebox. Inside rested a rusted steel handle folded flat against the wood. Ethan stared. This wasn't here by accident. He gripped the handle firmly, pulled upward. Nothing happened. He pulled harder. Still nothing. The steel lever moved only a few inches before stopping completely. Somewhere deep inside the wall came a faint metallic clunk, then silence. Ethan tried again. No change. He released the handle. It unlocked something. Rex had already turned away. The dog wasn't interested in the compartment anymore. Instead, he crossed the pantry slowly, stopping beside one of the massive support beams built into the corner of the room. He raised his nose, studied the wood. then gently touched it with one paw. Ethan followed. The beam looked ancient, thick enough to support half the house. Its surface carried hundreds of small scratches left by time. Then his flashlight found something unusual. Near shoulder height, someone had burned a symbol into the timber many decades earlier. A simple cattle brand, or so it appeared. A circle, crossed by a single vertical line, surrounded by 4 small marks. Ethan leaned closer. Something about the shape felt strangely familiar. He wiped away years of dust with his sleeve. The details became clearer. It wasn't just a ranch brand. It resembled a military compass rose. Or perhaps... No. His pulse quickened. He had seen this before. Years ago, inside an old briefing room overseas, a unit marker, modified slightly, almost hidden. Rex looked from the symbol back to Ethan, then nudged the beam gently with his nose. "What are you trying to tell me?" The dog placed one paw directly against the burned marking, not scratching, simply pressing. Ethan stared. Then, almost without thinking, he copied the movement. His gloved hand pressed firmly against the carved symbol for 1 second. Nothing. Then, a deep mechanical click echoed somewhere inside the wall, louder this time. Ancient gears groaned. Dust drifted from overhead beams. The entire pantry seemed to vibrate beneath their feet. Ethan immediately stepped backward. "What?" The rear wall moved. Not much. Only an inch. But enough. A narrow black line appeared between 2 massive timber panels that had looked completely solid only moments earlier. Cold air rushed through the opening, older than the house itself. Dry, still, untouched. Rex stood frozen, his ears lifted. His eyes never left the slowly widening gap. The wall continued moving inward with painful slowness until it stopped. Hidden behind decades of weathered boards stood something entirely unexpected. Not another wooden wall. Steel. A heavy gray steel door. Its surface was scarred with age but almost completely free of rust. No handle. Only a circular lock. Exactly the size of the brass key resting inside Ethan's jacket. He whispered without realizing it. "My God." The farmhouse had never been built against this wall. It had been built around it. Ethan slowly removed the tarnished key. His hand trembled. Not from fear, from disbelief. Samuel hadn't hidden something inside the house. He had hidden an entirely different structure beneath it. The key slid into the lock with surprising ease. It fit perfectly. For a long moment, Ethan hesitated. His heartbeat echoed loudly inside the silent pantry. Every instinct told him that once he turned the key, nothing about his life would remain the same. He looked down. Rex met his eyes. The old shepherd didn't move, didn't whine, didn't look away. It was the same calm expression he had worn before every mission overseas. "Ready when you are." Ethan took one slow breath, then turned the key. The mechanism answered with a heavy metallic thunk. Inside the door. Powerful bolts withdrew one by one. The sound rolled deep beneath the farmhouse like distant thunder. A final lock released. The steel door eased open a few inches by itself. A wave of cool, perfectly dry air drifted outward, carrying the faint scent of machine oil, aged paper, and cedar. Not decay, not mold. Something inside had remained protected for a very long time. Ethan aimed his flashlight through the narrow opening. Concrete, not dirt. Concrete walls disappearing into darkness. Metal shelving. A single overhead light fixture. Unlit. The beam reached only partway down a short corridor before darkness swallowed everything else. Rex stepped forward first. He paused at the threshold, sniffed carefully, then looked back at Ethan. Not alarmed, certain. Safe. Only then did he quietly cross into the hidden passage. Ethan followed. The steel door remained open behind them. Its hinges made no sound. After only a few steps, the corridor widened. The flashlight beam swept across smooth concrete walls that looked almost untouched by time. No water stains, no cracks, no animal nests. Someone had engineered this place to survive. On the right wall hung an old electrical breaker box. Below it sat neatly labeled wooden crates. Opposite them stood steel cabinets bolted into the concrete floor. Everything remained exactly where it had been left, as though whoever closed the door had expected someone, eventually, to come back. Ethan slowly turned in a full circle. His breathing became shallow. This wasn't merely a hidden room. It was a carefully constructed underground vault, and somewhere beyond the reach of his flashlight, more waited in the darkness. For a long moment, Ethan Mercer simply stood still. The silence inside the underground chamber felt different from the silence above. The old farmhouse groaned with age. The wind whispered through broken boards, and snow brushed softly against the roof. Down here, nothing moved. Nothing creaked. The air felt perfectly still, preserved like a forgotten moment that had never ended. Rex stepped farther into the corridor. His paws made soft echoes across the smooth concrete floor. Instead of searching frantically, he moved with calm confidence, inspecting each corner before continuing deeper. Every few yards he paused, lifted his nose and listened. Ethan followed carefully, sweeping the flashlight across the walls. Steel shelves lined one side of the room. Most held tightly sealed wooden crates marked only with dates. No company names. No government markings. Just years. Opposite them stood 4 gray filing cabinets bolted to the floor. Their paint remained almost untouched. Someone had expected moisture. Someone had planned for decades. The beam drifted farther. A heavy oak desk occupied the center of the chamber. On top rested a green banker's lamp, several sharpened pencils, and a leather-bound journal covered with a thin layer of dust. Everything appeared exactly as though Samuel Mercer had simply stepped away for lunch. Ethan slowly reached toward the journal. His fingers hesitated above the cover. Then he opened it. Inside, the handwriting matched the envelope now tucked safely inside his jacket. Samuel's writing. The first page carried only one sentence. If you are reading this, then Rex trusted this place before you did. Listen to him. He has better instincts than either of us. Ethan stared. Samuel had known about Rex. Not just that Ethan owned a dog. He knew his name. He looked down at the German shepherd. You knew more about us than I ever knew about you. Rex quietly continued exploring. Ethan turned the next page. Several paragraphs described repairs made to the underground chamber over the years. Ventilation inspected. Water seals replaced. Supplies rotated. Generators tested. The entries continued for decades. Samuel had returned here again and again. Not to use whatever was hidden below. To protect it. Near the back of the room, Rex suddenly stopped. His ears lifted. He looked toward a large steel cabinet built into the concrete wall. Not barking. Waiting. Ethan joined him. Unlike the other cabinets, this one carried no dust across its handle. Someone had opened it more recently than everything else. He grasped the latch. The hinges moved surprisingly smoothly. Inside sat 6 olive-green military footlockers stacked neatly in 2 columns. Each carried an engraved brass plate. Relief Fund Archive. Below them rested several heavy canvas bags tied with thick leather straps. Beside the bags sat a smaller steel lockbox. Ethan opened the first footlocker. Inside lay dozens of leather folders. Every folder carried a name, a photograph, a military identification number, letters, birth certificates, insurance records, photographs of children, wedding pictures, handwritten notes. He opened another, then another, the same. Different families, different soldiers, different wars. His chest tightened. These weren't financial records. They were lives, entire families preserved inside carefully organized files. He reached for the first canvas bag. It weighed far more than expected. Untying the leather strap, he folded back the thick fabric. Gold. Not jewelry, not coins scattered randomly. Neatly bundled government-issued gold certificates rested beside stacks of bearer bonds secured with faded paper bands. Another bag held sealed tubes of rare silver dollars. The third contained velvet cases filled with historic military medals still wrapped in protective cloth. Ethan slowly sat down on a wooden crate. His breathing became shallow. He had never seen this much wealth in one place, not even close. Yet somehow, the money no longer seemed like the most important discovery. The files beside it felt heavier. Rex quietly laid down near the footlockers, watching Ethan, waiting. The steel lockbox remained unopened. A second brass key rested inside the journal, smaller than the first. Ethan inserted it carefully. The lid released with a soft click. Inside lay several leather ledgers, a sealed envelope, and a folded map. He opened the uppermost ledger. Every page listed names, dates, dollar amounts, disbursements, medical expenses, educational assistance, mortgage payments, scholarship funds, widow support. Everything had been recorded by hand, meticulously, every penny accounted for. At the bottom of one page, Samuel had written, "No family will ever know their husband paid twice for his country." Ethan frowned. He kept reading. The entries began making sense. Years earlier, following a classified overseas operation, several service members had quietly pooled portions of their savings into a confidential relief trust. The money existed for one purpose. If any of them never returned, their families would never be abandoned. Samuel had served as trustee. He had never considered the money his own. He had only guarded it. Ethan turned another page. The handwriting changed. Different signatures appeared. Dozens of them. Veterans, officers, family witnesses, legal acknowledgments. Then, several pages had been marked in red ink. Attempted transfer, unauthorized request, account diversion, fraud investigation suspended. His pulse quickened. The next page carried a handwritten note. Certain businessmen learned of the trust. They believed no one would notice if veterans disappeared from the paperwork one file at a time. They underestimated how carefully soldiers keep records. Beneath that sentence rested a single folded newspaper clipping. Its headline read, "Local Development Company expands across western Montana." The company name had been circled. Grayson Holdings. Ethan stared. Grayson. The same family sitting across the conference table. He continued reading. Samuel had written one final paragraph beneath the clipping. "If Caroline ever learns this room still exists, she will not come for the money first. She will come for the records. The money can be replaced. The truth cannot." A chill moved through Ethan despite the stable temperature underground. So they hadn't wanted the ranch. They had wanted what the ranch concealed. He looked toward the stacked canvas bags again. $7 million. Perhaps more. Yet every dollar belonged to people who had already sacrificed more than money could measure. Samuel hadn't hidden wealth. He had hidden responsibility. Rex quietly stood. The dog walked toward Ethan and rested his head gently against his shoulder, almost as though he understood the weight settling there. Ethan scratched behind the shepherd's ears. "I can't keep this." Rex blinked slowly. "But I can't leave it either." His voice echoed softly across the chamber. Samuel had chosen him for a reason, not because he needed saving, because the trust did. Ethan carefully replaced every folder exactly where he had found it. He closed each footlocker, retied every canvas bag. Nothing would leave this chamber until he understood everything hidden inside. Finally, he picked up the sealed envelope resting inside the lockbox. Across the front, Samuel had written only 6 words. "Open after you know the truth." Ethan looked around the chamber one last time. The underground vault no longer felt like buried treasure. It felt like a promise, one made decades ago by men who believed honor should outlive them. Far above, the winter wind swept across Mercer Ridge. Neither Ethan nor Rex could hear it. They also couldn't hear another sound beginning somewhere beyond the ranch fence. A truck engine, still distant, still climbing, making its way slowly toward the mountain road. Someone else was coming. Rex heard the engine long before Ethan did. The German shepherd lifted his head sharply, ears locked toward the ceiling of the underground chamber. His body became perfectly still, not alarmed, focused. Ethan recognized the change immediately. "What is it, partner?" Rex looked toward the steel corridor leading back to the hidden door. Then he looked at Ethan. The message was unmistakable. Someone was approaching the ranch. Ethan closed the final ledger, carefully returning it to the steel lockbox exactly as Samuel had left it. He shut the lid, locked it with the smaller brass key, and slipped the key into a separate pocket from the larger one. Nothing could be misplaced. Not now. He took one last look around the chamber. The footlockers, the journals, the trust records, the canvas bags. Every piece represented a promise that stretched back decades. He quietly closed the steel cabinet before following Rex toward the hidden passage. The heavy steel door sealed behind them with a deep metallic thud. The old timber wall slid silently back into place until the pantry looked exactly as it had when they first entered. No one would have guessed that millions of dollars, and something even more valuable, rested only a few feet beyond the boards. Outside, the engine grew louder. Ethan stepped carefully onto the porch. A white county pickup climbed the gravel road, its tires crunching over patches of melting snow. The truck stopped beside the gate. A middle-aged man wearing a brown work jacket climbed out carrying a clipboard. He noticed Ethan immediately. "So you're Ethan Mercer?" "I am." The man walked forward, extending his hand. "Nathan Brooks, County Building and Property Safety." Ethan shook his hand. Nathan's grip was firm, military, not aggressive, just practiced. His eyes drifted briefly toward Rex. "Retired working dog?" "Military." Nathan smiled faintly. "I figured." He pulled up his pant leg just enough to reveal a faded Marine Corps tattoo above his boot. "Reserve engineer." "Long time ago." Ethan relaxed slightly. "What brings you out here?" Nathan sighed before looking toward the farmhouse. "I wish it were a friendly visit." He opened the clipboard. "This property has received multiple safety complaints." "Multiple?" "3. In 2 days." Ethan frowned. "I've only been here since yesterday." "I know." Nathan looked almost embarrassed. "Which is exactly why I drove out personally." He began walking around the front porch, carefully inspecting broken railings and cracked support posts. "The complaints say someone's living inside an unsafe structure." "I spent one night here." Nathan nodded. "I assumed as much." He continued making notes. "The strange part isn't the complaint. It's how quickly it happened." He looked directly at Ethan. "Someone wanted us out here fast." Ethan already knew who. Caroline Grayson. Nathan didn't answer immediately. I can't discuss who filed it. You don't have to. Nathan closed the clipboard for a moment. Off the record, he lowered his voice. Your relatives seem unusually interested in this place. Ethan remained silent. Nathan continued. I've inspected abandoned ranches for 15 years. Usually families spend decades trying to avoid inheriting them. This is the first time I've seen people fighting this hard to get rid of one. Rex quietly circled the yard, occasionally stopping to scent the wind. Nathan watched the dog. He's working. He never really stopped. Nathan nodded knowingly. Neither did you. The words lingered between them. After another 20 minutes, Nathan finished his inspection. The house is structurally compromised. I won't lie to you. The roof over the east side needs immediate reinforcement. The porch isn't safe. The chimney should be inspected. He paused. But Ethan waited. I don't believe demolition is necessary. Relief crossed Ethan's face. Nathan continued. Unfortunately, he reopened the clipboard. Someone has already filed a request asking the county to condemn the property. Ethan's expression hardened. What happens if that request goes through? Nathan answered honestly. If the county declares the structure unsafe beyond repair, he hesitated. You'll receive 30 days. 30 days for what? Either stabilize the building, or the county orders demolition. Ethan looked toward the farmhouse. And if I don't have the money? Nathan didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said quietly, then the county auctions the land to recover demolition costs. Silence settled over the yard. Exactly what Carolyn wanted. Nathan slipped the paperwork back into his truck. I'll delay filing my final recommendation as long as regulations allow. Why? Nathan smiled slightly. Because I don't like being used. He looked back at the ranch. And because something about this place doesn't add up. Before leaving, he reached into his glove compartment and handed Ethan a business card. My direct number. If anyone shows up here before I return, he glanced toward Rex. Call me. The county truck disappeared down the mountain road. Dust slowly settled behind it. Ethan remained standing beside the gate. 30 days. That wasn't enough time to restore an abandoned ranch, especially with no money, no equipment, no crew. He looked toward the pantry window. Hidden beneath the farmhouse rested evidence worth far more than the building itself. If demolition crews ever entered, everything Samuel had protected could disappear. Late that afternoon, Ethan drove into Elk Ridge for supplies. The town consisted of little more than a diner, a hardware store, a volunteer fire station, and a small post office. Outside the hardware store, an elderly man sat carving a piece of cedar. When Ethan introduced himself, the old man's eyebrows rose. Mercer? You must be Samuel's boy. I'm his great-nephew, the man smiled. Walter Jensen. Mabel said you might come through. They sat together on the porch while Rex rested nearby. Walter looked toward the mountains. Your uncle wasn't afraid of hard work. He fixed everybody else's fences before his own. He'd disappear for weeks sometimes. Never said where he went. Ethan listened carefully. Did he ever mention this ranch? Walter chuckled softly. He called it the safest place he'd ever known. That's all he'd say. Before Ethan left, Walter grew unexpectedly serious. People started asking about Samuel's land a few years back. What kind of people? Expensive trucks. Expensive boots. They weren't ranchers. They asked strange questions. About basements, old buildings, storage. Walter looked Ethan directly in the eye. Samuel always told them the same thing. There's nothing here worth stealing. Ethan thanked him and loaded lumber, nails, tarps, and basic repair supplies into the pickup. As sunset painted the mountains orange, he drove back toward Mercer Ridge. Halfway there, Rex suddenly stood inside the cab. A low growl rumbled deep in his chest. Ethan looked into the rearview mirror. A black SUV had appeared behind them. It stayed several hundred yards back, never passing, never falling behind, just watching. The SU-5 followed them almost to the ranch entrance. Then, without warning, it slowed, turned around, and disappeared back down the mountain road. Ethan watched until its taillights vanished. They found us. Rex remained staring toward the empty road long after the vehicle disappeared. Neither of them noticed that hidden behind dark-tinted glass, the passenger in the SUV had already lifted a phone. "He found the ranch," the man said quietly. There was a brief pause. Then he listened. "Yes." "He stayed." Another pause. "I think he's already inside the house." The caller ended the conversation. Miles away, Caroline Grayson slowly lowered her own phone. She stood inside her office overlooking downtown Missoula. Without saying a word, she opened a locked drawer. Inside lay a faded photograph of Samuel Mercer standing beside several uniformed soldiers in front of the Mercer Ridge farmhouse. She touched the picture with one finger, then quietly whispered, "We're almost out of time." She closed the drawer and reached for another phone. Caroline Grayson waited until the office door clicked shut before dialing a number she clearly knew by memory. The call connected after 2 rings. "He found the ranch," she said quietly. A man's voice answered from the other end. "I already know." "He stayed." "I know that too." Caroline walked toward the wide window overlooking the city. "You promised the place would be empty." It was. "Then how did he get inside so quickly?" A long silence followed. Finally, the man replied, "If Samuel left him instructions," his voice trailed off. "We're already behind." Caroline's grip tightened around the phone. "I don't care about the land. I care about what might still be there." Another pause. "Then don't wait." The call ended. Caroline stared at her reflection in the dark glass. Outside, evening lights slowly flickered across Missoula. Far away, hidden beneath fresh mountain snow, Mercer Ridge Ranch settled into another freezing night. Ethan spent the remaining daylight reinforcing the farmhouse as best he could. Using lumber from Elk Ridge, he braced part of the sagging porch and covered the worst section of the damaged roof with heavy tarps. The repairs were temporary, but they would buy him time against the weather. Every few minutes, Rex left whatever he was doing and walked the perimeter of the property. The old military dog never wandered far. He checked the tree line, the burned barn, the creek, then returned. Again, again, again. His routine never changed. As darkness settled across the valley, snow began falling once more. Large flakes drifted silently between the towering pines. The mountains disappeared behind a curtain of white. Inside the farmhouse, Ethan added another log to the fire. Warm light flickered across the stone walls. For the first time since arriving, he finally opened Samuel's sealed envelope. The paper inside had yellowed with age. Samuel's handwriting remained strong. "Ethan, if you are reading this, then you chose questions over comfort. I hoped you would." Ethan smiled faintly. That sounded exactly like the man Rebecca had described. He continued reading. "You will soon discover something that cannot be measured by money. If the chamber is still intact, then I succeeded. If Rex trusted it before you did, then he is every bit the military dog I believed he would become." Ethan looked toward the shepherd lying quietly beside the fireplace. Rex lifted his head as though hearing his own name. The letter continued. "Do not mistake what is hidden below for an inheritance. It is a duty. Men better than I entrusted it to my care because they believed promises made between soldiers should survive even after soldiers do not. Ethan slowly lowered the page. Samuel had written those words years before his death, perhaps decades. Yet somehow it felt as though he were sitting across the room. A sudden gust of wind struck the house. The windows rattled. The fire flickered. Rex stood instantly, his ears turned toward the front porch. Not the wind. Something else. Ethan quietly folded the letter and slipped it back into the envelope. "What do you hear?" The dog remained perfectly still. Then, a faint crunch. Snow. Outside. Someone was walking. Not one person. More than one. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Ethan reached for the flashlight and the heavy pry bar he had been using during repairs. Old instincts returned immediately. He extinguished the lantern, leaving only the fireplace burning low. Darkness filled most of the house. Rex moved toward the front door, not barking, waiting. Another sound, metal lightly striking wood. Someone testing the porch railing. Ethan quietly approached the nearest window and carefully lifted one corner of the curtain. 3 figures stood outside, all dressed in dark winter clothing. Their faces were hidden beneath knit caps. One carried a powerful flashlight. Another held a crowbar. The third pointed toward the rear of the house. Not teenagers, not lost hikers. They had come prepared. Ethan stepped back from the window. His heartbeat remained steady. Years of combat had taught him something important. Panic wastes time. Preparation saves it. He whispered, "Rex." The German shepherd looked up immediately. "Stay close." Without another sound, Ethan moved toward the pantry. He opened the hidden wall once more and quickly entered the underground chamber. The ledgers. Those mattered most. Money could be recovered. History could not. He gathered the leather ledgers into a waterproof canvas satchel hanging beside the desk. The satchel looked as though Samuel had prepared it years ago for exactly this moment. A narrow leather strap fit comfortably across Ethan's shoulder. He looked around once more. Everything else remained exactly where it belonged. The chamber must stay hidden. He returned through the steel door, closed it, and carefully reset the hidden wall. Seconds later, the front door exploded inward. Wood splintered across the floor. Cold air rushed into the farmhouse. Flashlight beams swept through the darkness. "Search everything." The voice came low and controlled. "They said he arrived yesterday." Another answered. "If he found anything, it has to still be here." Ethan quietly backed toward the hallway. He had no intention of confronting 3 armed intruders inside a collapsing house. His mission was different. Protect the records. Protect Rex. He motioned toward the rear of the house. Rex understood immediately. Together they slipped toward the pantry. One of the intruders suddenly turned. "Movement!" A flashlight beam flashed across the hallway. "There!" The men rushed forward. Ethan reached the pantry just as one intruder rounded the corner. The stranger swung the crowbar toward him. Ethan sidestepped instinctively. The blow struck the wall instead. Wood shattered. Before the attacker could recover, Rex launched forward. Not wildly, not viciously, precisely. The shepherd struck the man's forearm, knocking the crowbar from his grip. The intruder cried out in surprise and stumbled backward. Another man rushed into the hallway, holding a large hunting knife. Everything happened in seconds. Rex pivoted to shield Ethan. The man slashed downward while trying to push past the dog. Rex intercepted the movement. The blade caught the shepherd high along his shoulder before the attacker lost his balance against the narrow hallway wall. Ethan drove forward, using the pry bar to knock the knife from the man's hand without striking his head. The weapon clattered across the floor. The third intruder shouted, "Forget him! Find the room!" They didn't know where it was, not yet. But they suspected. Blood darkened Rex's tanned fur. The shepherd remained standing, ready, alert, as though he barely noticed the injury. Ethan's stomach tightened. No! He knelt briefly beside the dog. Warm blood covered his glove. The wound wasn't pouring blood, but it was deep enough to demand immediate treatment. Rex nudged Ethan's hand. The message was clear. Keep moving. The old farmhouse suddenly echoed with heavy footsteps as the intruders spread through the rooms. One entered the kitchen. Another began striking walls with the crowbar. They were searching blindly. Ethan remembered the narrow passage Samuel had marked on the old map, the livestock tunnel. He rushed into the underground chamber one final time, secured the satchel containing the trust ledgers across his shoulder, and found the concealed exit at the rear of the vault. A low stone passage disappeared beneath the hillside. Cold air drifted through it. Rex followed close behind, despite the blood staining his coat. The concealed hatch closed quietly above them. Moments later, muffled pounding echoed through the hidden chamber as the intruders continued searching the house. They had missed the tunnel. For now. The passage climbed gradually upward before ending beneath a weathered wooden hatch, hidden inside an abandoned sheep pen, nearly 100 yards behind the burned barn. Ethan pushed the hatch open. Snow covered everything. Fresh wind erased their tracks almost immediately. He lifted Rex carefully through the opening. Only then did the shepherd stumble. Just once. Ethan caught him before he fell. You stayed between me and that knife. Rex looked up, breathing harder now. I'm not leaving you. Ethan carried the medical satchel to the truck as fast as the deep snow allowed. He opened the rear door and spread blankets across the seat. The bleeding had slowed, but not enough. He wrapped the wound tightly, using pressure bandages from his military medical kit. Rex never whimpered. He simply rested his head against Ethan's arm. The engine started on the second try. Snow continued falling heavily as the pickup rolled down the mountain road. The nearest veterinary clinic lay nearly 40 miles away. The windshield wipers struggled against the blizzard. Ethan gripped the steering wheel tightly with one hand, while the other repeatedly reached across the seat to reassure the dog. You've gotten me home more than once. His voice broke for the first time in years. My turn now. Ahead, the mountain road disappeared into swirling white. Behind them, Mercer Ridge Ranch stood dark against the storm. And hidden beneath its weathered floorboards, the secret Samuel Mercer had protected for decades waited in silence. But it would not remain hidden for much longer. The blizzard swallowed the mountain road behind Ethan Mercer as the old pickup pushed through drifting snow. Headlights reflected off the white curtain ahead, revealing little more than 20 feet of frozen gravel before disappearing into darkness again. Rex lay across the rear seat. His breathing remained steady, but slower now. The pressure bandage wrapped around his shoulder had stopped most of the bleeding, though crimson still stained the tan fur beneath it. Every few minutes, Ethan reached back without taking his eyes off the road. You stay with me, Rex answered with the smallest movement of his ears. The old military dog understood. He was still on duty. Nearly an hour later, a weathered wooden sign emerged from the storm. Elk Ridge Veterinary Clinic. A single light glowed inside. Ethan barely stopped the truck before carrying Rex through the front door. A woman in green scrubs looked up from the reception desk. The moment she saw the blood, everything else disappeared. Treatment room, now. She didn't ask about insurance. She didn't ask about payment. She simply opened the door. My name is Dr. Olivia Carter. What happened? Ethan laid Rex gently on the examination table. He protected me. The veterinarian's expression softened. He usually does? Every day. She She carefully cut away the blood-soaked bandage while a veterinary technician prepared sterile instruments. "The wound is deep," Olivia said quietly, "but it appears to have missed the shoulder joint." Ethan finally allowed himself to breathe. "Will he be all right?" "I believe so." She glanced up. "But he'll need stitches, antibiotics, and several weeks without heavy activity." She smiled gently. "Knowing shepherds." She looked at Rex. "That's usually the hardest part." Even while injured, Rex never took his eyes off Ethan. Only after Ethan rested one hand against his neck did the old dog finally relax enough for sedation. Within minutes, Rex drifted into sleep. The examination room became strangely quiet. Olivia washed her hands before turning toward Ethan. "You've been carrying that bag since you walked in." Only then did Ethan realize the canvas satchel containing Samuel's ledgers was still strapped across his shoulder. He had forgotten it completely. "It's important." "I guessed." She nodded respectfully. "I'll be with Rex for a little while. If you need coffee," she pointed toward a small waiting room. "There's fresh coffee down the hall." Ethan thanked her and quietly stepped outside. Snow continued falling beyond the clinic windows. He sat alone beside an old stone fireplace. For the first time since arriving at Mercer Ridge, exhaustion finally caught him. His hands shook slightly. Not from fear, from everything that had happened too quickly to understand. The satchel rested across his knees. Samuel had trusted him with it. Now he needed to understand why. He carefully removed the largest leather ledger. Near the back, several folded documents had been tucked between its pages. One immediately caught his attention. It was not written by Samuel. It bore an official military seal. Across the top appeared the words, "Relief Trust Charter." Signed beneath were 12 names: veterans, families, witnesses. One signature stood apart from the others: Samuel Henry Mercer, trustee. Beneath the signatures, another sentence had been added by hand: "If I fail, deliver everything to the first Mercer who still understands service before self." Ethan stared at the page. The words felt impossibly personal. Someone had believed that another generation would eventually arrive. Someone had believed Ethan would not abandon the responsibility. He continued reading. The following pages describe the creation of the trust after a classified rescue mission overseas. Several soldiers had returned carrying wounds that never appeared in official reports. Others never returned at all. Together, they had quietly built a financial safety net for the families left behind. No publicity, no recognition. Just promises. Exactly the kind soldiers made when no one else was listening. A folded photograph slipped from between two pages. Ethan picked it up carefully. 6 men stood outside the Mercer Ridge farmhouse. Samuel appeared much younger. Beside him stood soldiers wearing uniforms from different branches of service. One of them wore Navy camouflage. The man's face seemed strangely familiar. Ethan looked closer. Then everything inside him stopped. His father, years before Ethan had been born, standing beside Samuel with one arm around another soldier, smiling. The back of the photograph carried a handwritten note: "Brothers are chosen more often than they are born." Ethan quietly closed his eyes. His father had never spoken about this place, never mentioned the trust, never even mentioned Samuel after Ethan enlisted. How many burdens had older generations quietly carried without passing them forward? A voice interrupted his thoughts. "Mind if I sit?" Ethan looked up. An older man wearing a heavy wool coat stood beside the fireplace carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. I recognized the truck outside. The man extended one cup. "I'm Daniel Hayes." Ethan accepted it. "Thank you." "I'm retired now." Daniel smiled. "Mostly. I teach military history a few days a month." And occasionally Dr. Carter calls when she thinks someone needs company more than coffee. Ethan almost smiled. She seems to know people well. She does. Daniel's eyes settled briefly on the satchel. You've found something. Ethan hesitated. I don't know who to trust. Daniel nodded. A healthy habit. After several quiet moments, Ethan removed only the photograph. Nothing more. Daniel adjusted his glasses. His expression changed immediately. Where did you get this? My ranch. Daniel looked again, slowly, almost reverently. I've spent 30 years researching privately organized veterans relief groups. He looked back at Ethan. I've never seen this photograph. You recognize the men? A few. His finger rested lightly beside Samuel. Your uncle. Then another. Colonel Thomas Ridley. Another. Master Sergeant Victor Hale. Daniel looked surprised. These men disappeared from public records after one overseas operation. He turned the photograph over, then froze. Good Lord. What? Daniel handed it back. Do you realize what that note means? Ethan shook his head. These weren't simply friends. They built something together. Something important enough that no official archive has ever recorded it. His voice grew quieter. If there are documents with that photograph, he looked directly at Ethan. They may rewrite part of military history. Ethan hesitated. There are documents. Daniel leaned forward. Protect them. Whatever you've found. He paused. Someone clearly wanted it forgotten. The waiting room fell silent again. Outside, snow continued covering the roads. Inside the treatment room, surgical lights still glowed over Rex. Several hours later, Dr. Olivia Carter finally emerged. She removed her gloves and smiled. He's awake? Relief flooded Ethan's face. Can I see him? Of course. Rex lay comfortably beneath warm blankets, his shoulder wrapped in fresh white bandages. The moment Ethan entered, the old shepherd slowly lifted his head. His tail thumped once against the blanket. Not hard. Just enough. You scared me. Rex leaned forward carefully until his nose rested against Ethan's hand. Olivia watched quietly. I've treated police dogs. Search and rescue dogs. Military dogs. She smiled softly. I've rarely seen one trust someone this completely. Ethan gently stroked Rex's neck. He trusted me before I learned to trust myself. Olivia handed him a small bottle of medication. He'll recover. But don't ask him to be a hero for a while. Ethan looked at Rex. I'll try. The shepherd blinked slowly, as though politely disagreeing. Outside the clinic, dawn slowly pushed through the storm clouds. The mountains glowed beneath fresh snow. For the first time in many years, Ethan no longer felt like a man wandering without direction. He carried Samuel's trust. He carried unanswered questions. And beside him, he still carried the partner who had once again refused to leave his side. Neither of them realized that, back at Mercer Ridge Ranch, the intruders had returned before sunrise. This time, they weren't searching for a hidden room. They were searching for proof that Ethan had already found it. Snow still covered Mercer Ridge Ranch when two black SUVs rolled slowly through the broken front gate just after sunrise. The engines stopped. No one spoke immediately. 4 men stepped out, dressed in insulated work jackets that bore the logo of a regional construction company. To anyone passing by, they would have looked like surveyors preparing a routine inspection. They were anything but routine. One of them walked straight to the farmhouse. Another photographed the porch. A third examined the fresh tire tracks leading away from the property. He left in a hurry, one man muttered. The tallest of the group entered the damaged pantry and studied the floor where Ethan had lifted the hidden board the night before. He crouched, ran his fingertips across the wood, then slowly smiled. The dust is disturbed. Another man joined him. You think he found it? I think he found something. He stood. But not enough. He looked toward the hidden wall. There are no pry marks, no broken boards. He either missed it, or someone taught him how to open it. His phone vibrated. He answered immediately. No. He listened. We found evidence he searched the pantry. Another pause. We're moving to phase 2. The call ended. Far below the mountains, another phone rang inside the county administration building. Nathan Brooks answered while reviewing inspection reports. Nathan Brooks, a woman's voice came through the receiver. This is Caroline Grayson. Nathan immediately recognized the name. I understand you're handling the Mercer Ridge property. I am. I'm calling because I'm deeply concerned. Nathan remained silent. My cousin is suffering from severe emotional trauma after military service. He has no business living inside an unsafe structure. She paused. I'm formally requesting emergency demolition before someone gets hurt. Nathan looked out his office window. Mrs. Grayson, my report hasn't even been finalized. It needs to be. Immediately. Her voice remained perfectly controlled. The house is dangerous. It should come down before anyone dies. Nathan slowly leaned back in his chair. I'll inspect it again. I'm sure you will. The call ended. He looked at the phone for several seconds before quietly opening Ethan's file again. 3 complaints, all filed within 48 hours, all connected to the same family. His instincts as a Marine told him exactly what his paperwork could not. Someone was rushing, and people only rushed when time mattered. Nearly 40 miles away, Ethan carefully helped Rex into the pickup outside Dr. Olivia Carter's clinic. The shepherd moved more slowly than usual, favoring his injured shoulder, but his eyes remained bright. Olivia handed Ethan another packet of medication. Twice a day. Keep the bandage clean. And absolutely no chasing strangers. Ethan smiled. I'll explain that to him. You can try. She laughed softly before becoming serious again. If anyone asks, she hesitated. I never discussed your dog with them. Ethan frowned. What do you mean? This morning. She looked toward the empty parking lot. A man stopped by asking whether a wounded German shepherd had been treated here overnight. What did you tell him? Nothing. What did he look like? Mid-50s. Dark jacket. Expensive truck. She paused. He wasn't asking like someone worried about a dog. Ethan exchanged a quiet glance with Rex. They're looking. Olivia nodded. I thought you should know. Before leaving town, Ethan drove to the small historical museum where Daniel Hayes volunteered twice each week. The retired military historian was already waiting on the front steps. I thought you'd come. You did? Daniel smiled. I didn't sleep much after seeing that photograph. Inside his office, shelves overflowed with military books, maps, and archival boxes. Ethan carefully removed Samuel's satchel. He laid one leather ledger on the desk. Daniel opened it with the same care a minister might use opening an old family Bible. For nearly 20 minutes, he read in complete silence. Finally, he removed his glasses. Ethan. His voice carried genuine amazement. This isn't simply a trust. No. Daniel slowly turned another page. The records don't stop with financial assistance. They document the identities of every family the fund ever helped. He pointed toward several handwritten signatures. These are original. No copies. No government duplicates. They're the only surviving records. Ethan leaned closer. What happens if they're destroyed? Daniel looked directly at him. History disappears. The room became very quiet. Daniel continued. The money matters. But these ledgers, he gently touched the leather cover. Prove promises were kept. He reached into a nearby filing cabinet and removed several newspaper clippings. I've been researching Samuel Mercer for years. He always appeared on the edges of larger stories. Never at the center. He spread the articles across the desk. Each showed veterans' families receiving anonymous assistance, medical bills paid, college tuition covered, emergency housing funded. None explained where the money came from. One clipping included a grainy photograph of Samuel walking away from a courthouse. He never accepted recognition. Daniel looked up. Now I know why. Ethan reached into the satchel again. There was something else. He removed the smaller sealed envelope labeled, "Open after you know the truth." Daniel immediately pushed it back toward him. That one belongs to you. Ethan broke the old wax seal. Inside lay a handwritten letter and a cassette tape carefully wrapped in cloth. The letter was brief. Ethan, if you are reading this, then you already understand the money is not yours. Neither was it mine. The tape explains everything I could never safely write. Listen to it only after you return to Mercer Ridge, not before. Beneath the letter rested one final sentence. Trust no one who asks about the money before asking about the families. Ethan folded the letter carefully. Daniel nodded approvingly. Your uncle knew exactly what he was doing. Outside, clouds gathered once more over the Sapphire Mountains. Nathan Brooks pulled his county truck onto Mercer Ridge Road for a second inspection. The deeper he drove into the valley, the more uneasy he became. Fresh tire tracks crossed the snow. Not one vehicle, several. He parked near the gate and stepped out. The silence felt wrong. The porch showed new footprints. The pantry floor carried signs of recent activity. Someone had searched the house after his first visit. Nathan slowly removed his phone. He called Ethan. No answer. He left a brief voicemail. Ethan, it's Nathan. If you're getting this, he glanced toward the disturbed snow around the barn. Don't come back alone. He ended the call, then quietly photographed every footprint before forwarding the images to his supervisor with a request for immediate review. As he climbed back into the truck, he looked once more toward the old farmhouse. The place no longer looked abandoned. It looked hunted. That evening, Ethan and Rex finally began the drive back toward Mercer Ridge. The mountains stood dark beneath gathering storm clouds. The satchel rested safely beside him. The cassette tape remained unopened. Rex, though still sore, lifted his head as the ranch came into view far ahead. He gave one low, cautious rumble, not toward the house, toward the road leading to it. Two excavators sat parked beside the gate. Their yellow arms reached into the gray evening sky like enormous metal predators waiting for permission to move. Someone hadn't come to search anymore. Someone had come prepared to erase the ranch forever. The two excavators stood motionless behind the locked front gate, their steel buckets resting on frozen ground beneath a sky heavy with snow. Ethan slowed the pickup until it rolled to a quiet stop along the shoulder. Rex lifted his head from the passenger seat. Even with fresh bandages wrapped around his shoulder, the old German shepherd's ears stood forward. Watching. Measuring. Waiting. Ethan studied the machines through the windshield. No operators. No county trucks. No warning signs. Just equipment left in plain sight. They're sending a message, he said quietly. Rex's eyes never left the gate. Ethan reached for his phone. One voicemail waited. Nathan Brooks. He pressed play. Ethan, it's Nathan. If you're getting this, don't come back alone. The message ended. A second later, the phone rang again. Nathan. Ethan answered immediately. I'm looking at two excavators. I know, Nathan replied. His voice was calm but urgent. I've been trying to reach you. They're here early. They're not supposed to be. What do you mean? I never approved demolition. Nathan paused. And neither did the county. Ethan looked back toward the machines. So why are they here? Because someone wants you to believe the decision has already been made. Silence settled between them. Nathan continued. I've requested a temporary hold. But that's only paperwork. If someone starts tearing that house down before the legal questions are answered. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Everything Samuel had protected could disappear beneath broken timber and concrete. I'll be there in 20 minutes, Nathan said. Don't confront anyone by yourself. I won't. The call ended. Ethan looked at Rex. Let's do this the right way. The shepherd blinked once, as though agreeing. Instead of driving through the gate, Ethan parked beside the road and walked the remaining distance on foot. Fresh snow muffled every step. The ranch looked strangely peaceful. Smoke no longer rose from the chimney. The porch repairs he had made only days earlier remained intact. Yet deep tire tracks circled the property. Someone had driven heavy equipment around every building. Someone had measured, planned, prepared. Rex stopped beside the pantry window. He sniffed once, then twice. His body relaxed. No intruders remained inside, only their scent. Ethan unlocked the front door. The farmhouse greeted him with familiar silence. The pantry wall remained untouched. The hidden entrance had survived. For now. He checked the concealed compartment beneath the floorboards. The steel release remained exactly where he had left it. Samuel's chamber was still safe. A truck engine echoed outside. Nathan Brooks stepped from his county pickup carrying a thick folder beneath one arm. He looked exhausted. I came as fast as I could. Ethan led him inside. Nathan examined the fresh footprints, the damaged hallway, and the repaired porch before stopping in the pantry. This is where they searched. They were looking for something. Ethan met his eyes. They were. Nathan didn't ask what. Instead, he removed several official documents. I filed my final inspection this morning. And? I declared the farmhouse historically significant, pending further review. Ethan frowned. Can you do that? Nathan smiled faintly. I found enough unusual structural features to justify delaying demolition. He looked around the pantry. I wasn't lying. This house isn't ordinary. It deserves another look. He handed Ethan a stamped copy of the order. That gives us time. How much? Not forever. But long enough. Ethan quietly thanked him. Nathan folded his arms. I've also been doing some digging. He removed another file. Douglas Grayson's construction company submitted an inquiry about this property 6 months ago. 6 months? They requested historical surveys. So they knew Samuel was still alive. Nathan nodded. They also requested copies of old utility maps. Looking for underground structures? I can't prove that. But it's one possibility. Ethan thought about the hidden chamber, the steel door, the ventilation system, the years Samuel spent protecting it. They knew. Nathan watched him carefully. I think they suspected. A second vehicle pulled into the ranch. Rebecca Lawson stepped out carrying a leather briefcase. I came as soon as Daniel called. She entered the farmhouse and immediately noticed Rex. The old shepherd rose carefully, despite his injury. Rebecca knelt beside him. You've been busy. Rex accepted the gentle scratch behind his ears before returning to Ethan's side. Rebecca stood. There have been developments. She opened her briefcase. I has reviewed Samuel's estate documents again. There was one sealed filing. The probate court wasn't instructed to release until someone challenged the inheritance. She handed Ethan a notarized document. Across the top appeared Samuel's signature. Below it, A sworn declaration. Rebecca spoke softly. Samuel anticipated legal challenges. He specifically explained why he left everything to you. Ethan read silently. I leave Mercer Ridge to Ethan Mercer because he understands that service carries responsibility beyond personal gain. The trust hidden there belongs to those who earned it through sacrifice. Ethan will recognize that before he recognizes its value. Others will not. The room fell quiet. Nathan slowly exhaled. He knew. Rebecca nodded. He expected someone to contest the will, and he wanted the court to understand exactly why he chose you. Ethan looked up. So Caroline can't argue he wasn't thinking clearly. Rebecca smiled. Not successfully. He documented every reason while fully competent. She removed one final folder. There's more. Inside were transfer documents establishing a charitable foundation. Samuel had prepared them years earlier. The foundation remained unsigned. Its purpose was clearly stated: to provide assistance for homeless veterans, surviving military families, and retired working service dogs. Ethan stared at the pages. Samuel had never intended the money to make one man wealthy. He had intended it to continue serving others. Nathan looked toward the hidden pantry wall without knowing what rested beyond it. Seems your uncle trusted the right person. Before Ethan could answer, another vehicle approached. This time it wasn't black. It wasn't expensive. It was an aging pickup coated in road salt. Walter Jensen climbed out carrying a small wooden box. I figured you'd be back. He walked onto the porch and handed the box to Ethan. Samuel left this with me 12 years ago. He said I'd know when to deliver it. Inside rested an old military challenge coin, worn smooth around the edges. Beneath it lay a folded note. The money protects families. The ranch protects hope. Never separate the two. Tears filled Ethan's eyes before he quietly folded the note again. Years of wandering. Years of believing his life had ended when he came home from war. Samuel had seen something different. Not a broken veteran, a future caretaker. Rex leaned gently against Ethan's leg. Nathan looked toward the mountains where evening sunlight broke through the clouds for the first time in days. So, he smiled, what are you going to do with a ranch? Ethan looked across the snow-covered valley. He imagined repaired fences, working barns, veterans walking the fields beside service dogs, families finding peace where silence had once hidden pain. He smiled. I think. He rested one hand on Rex's shoulder. I'm finally going to come home. Far beyond the ridge, inside a downtown office in Missoula, Caroline Grayson opened an email from her attorney. The subject line contained only 6 words. Emergency injunction has been granted. She read the first paragraph. The county had suspended all demolition activity. Samuel's sworn declaration had entered the court record. Her expression slowly hardened. She reached for her phone, then stopped. For the first time since Samuel's funeral, she realized the ranch might already be beyond her reach. Carolyn Grayson remained motionless in her office as the evening light faded beyond the windows of downtown Missoula. The emergency injunction lay open on her desk. Samuel's sworn declaration had become part of the official court record. The demolition had been stopped. The property was now protected pending further legal review. She slowly closed the file. For years, she had convinced herself that Mercer Ridge contained nothing more than an old secret that would eventually disappear beneath weather, neglect, and time. Instead, the secret had survived, and now it belonged to someone she had underestimated. She looked once more toward the framed skyline outside her office before quietly turning off the lights. The battle for the ranch was over. She finally understood she had already lost. Spring arrived slowly in the Sapphire Mountains. Snow retreated from the lower pastures first, revealing patches of green beneath weeks of melting ice. Water rushed through the creek with renewed strength. The old ranch awakened one quiet morning at a time. Ethan Mercer stood on the front porch watching the sunrise. The farmhouse still bore scars. Fresh support beams reinforced the roof. New windows had replaced several broken panes. The porch stood straight again. It was not perfect. Neither was he. But both had stopped falling apart. Behind him, the smell of fresh coffee drifted through the restored kitchen. Rex stepped outside, carrying himself with the calm confidence of an old soldier. His shoulder had healed. A faint scar remained beneath the fur, the only visible reminder of the night he had placed himself between Ethan and danger. The shepherd sat beside the porch steps, watching the valley below. Exactly as he had watched countless landscapes before. Always protecting. Always waiting. Ethan smiled. "You finally get to rest." Rex glanced toward him. The look almost seemed amused. Neither of them truly believed that. The legal process lasted several months. Every ledger was carefully examined. Financial experts verified the bearer bonds. Archivists authenticated Samuel's journals. Military historians confirmed the signatures preserved inside the trust records. Every document supported the same conclusion. Samuel Mercer had never hidden personal wealth. He had protected a veterans' relief trust exactly as its founders intended. The estimated value of the financial assets exceeded $7 million. But what drew the greatest attention was not the money. It was the story. Families once believed forgotten discovered letters proving that strangers had quietly paid mortgages, medical bills, and college tuition decades earlier. Widows learned that anonymous checks arriving during difficult years had never been accidents. Children, now grandparents themselves, finally understood why their families had survived after losing someone in uniform. The trust had never asked for recognition. It had simply kept its promises. Rebecca Lawson closed the final probate file with a satisfied smile. "The court has officially transferred stewardship." She handed Ethan the signed documents. "Samuel's wishes have been fully honored." Ethan accepted them carefully. "I wish he were here." Rebecca looked toward the mountains through the office window. "I think he'd tell you the same thing he wrote." "What?" "Service doesn't end when the uniform comes off." Ethan quietly nodded. He understood now. Better than ever before. Nathan Brooks visited Mercer Ridge often during the following months. Sometimes he arrived carrying lumber, sometimes fencing supplies, sometimes nothing more than coffee. The county inspector had become a friend. One afternoon he leaned against a newly repaired fence while watching volunteers replace old posts across the pasture. "You know," he smiled, "I've inspected buildings for 20 years. I've never seen one save this many lives." Ethan looked across the ranch. "I don't think the building did." Nathan followed his gaze toward Rex. The old German shepherd was patiently walking beside a younger veteran struggling to regain confidence after years of isolation. The man smiled for the first time all morning as Rex gently nudged a tennis ball toward him. Nathan laughed softly. "No, I suppose it didn't." Professor Daniel Hayes helped preserve the hidden chamber exactly as Samuel had left it. Every shelf remained in place. Every footlocker stayed where Samuel had arranged it. The ledgers rested inside climate-controlled archival cases. Visitors would never touch them, but they would learn from them. Above the entrance hung a simple bronze plaque. Promises kept, nothing more, nothing less. Daniel often paused before leaving. History usually remembers battles, he once told Ethan. I think this room remembers something far more important. What? The people who came home, and the ones who made sure others could. Dr. Olivia Carter visited every few weeks to examine Rex. She always smiled at the same conclusion. He's slowing down. She scratched behind the shepherd's ears. but only because his heart doesn't realize he's getting older. Rex accepted the attention with quiet dignity. Age had silvered his muzzle. His movements had become more deliberate. Yet every evening he still made one complete circuit around the ranch before lying down on the porch. Some habits never disappeared. Within 3 years, Mercer Ridge looked very different. The burned barn had been rebuilt using reclaimed timber from nearby ranches. The old pasture held horses once again. A training field stretched across the southern meadow, where veterans learned to work with future service dogs. Cabins stood near the creek for families needing temporary housing. A woodworking shop occupied the restored equipment shed. The farmhouse welcomed visitors instead of hiding secrets. Above the entrance, a modest wooden sign read, "Mercer Ridge Veterans and K-9 Recovery Ranch, no grand opening, no ribbon cutting, no television cameras. Just quiet purpose." Exactly as Samuel would have wanted. On a warm autumn afternoon, Ethan walked slowly toward the restored pantry. Rex followed close behind. The hidden mechanism still worked. The old timber wall moved aside with the same patient whisper it had made on the day Rex first discovered it. The steel door waited beyond. Ethan unlocked it. The underground chamber remained peaceful. He walked to the oak desk where Samuel's original journal rested beneath protective glass. Beside it lay the weathered brass key that had opened the hidden door for the first time. It no longer belonged in his pocket. It belonged here. He placed one hand gently against the glass. "Thank you." The words echoed softly through the chamber. Not because of the money, not because of the ranch, because one man had believed another broken soldier could still become something more. Ethan turned toward the entrance. Rex waited patiently at the threshold. Older now, slower, still watching, still ready. Together they stepped back into the afternoon sunlight. The hidden wall closed quietly behind them, not to conceal the truth anymore, but to protect it. That evening, veterans gathered around a large fire pit overlooking the valley. Some laughed, some sat quietly. Others simply watched the mountains change color beneath the setting sun. Several service dogs rested beside their handlers. Children played safely nearby. No one spoke about fortunes. No one spoke about lawsuits. No one spoke about victory. Because the greatest victory surrounded them. People who had once believed they were alone had found one another. Ethan settled onto the porch steps. Rex lowered himself beside him with a satisfied sigh. The old shepherd rested his head against Ethan's leg exactly as he had outside the truck stop so many months before. Only now, there were no highways, no parking lots, no uncertainty, only home. Ethan looked across the valley one final time. They laughed at the inheritance. He gently rested his hand on Rex's neck. They never understood what was really hidden here. The mountains answered with quiet wind moving through the pines. The greatest treasure had never been $7 million. It had been trust carried across generations, promises protected in silence, a wounded veteran finding purpose again, and one faithful dog who heard a secret door long before any human believed it existed. Sometimes the richest inheritance is not what changes your life. It is what gives your life back. If you believe loyalty, honor, and doing the right thing still matter, comment one below and tell us where you're watching from. Stories like this remind us that real strength isn't measured by what you own, but by what you choose to protect. If these stories of justice, dignity, and perseverance speak to you, subscribe and join us for the next journey.